Hi there. Welcome to the English Vault. Today we follow Katalin Kariko, a scientist who spent decades chasing an idea many people dismissed. Her story is not about instant genius. It is about walking into closed rooms, hearing no again and again, and still believing that one small molecule could change what medicine might do. Chapter 1: The Girl Who Learned to Notice. Katalin Kariko was born in Hungary, far from the famous laboratories and powerful universities that often appear in stories about scientific discovery. Her childhood world was modest, practical, and close to the rhythms of ordinary life. She did not grow up surrounded by luxury. She grew up watching how people worked, how families solved problems, and how nature carried quiet mysteries in plain sight. As a child, she was curious in a steady way, not loud curiosity, not the kind that needs attention, but the kind that keeps returning to a question after everyone else has moved on. She wanted to understand what living things were doing beneath the surface. A plant, an animal, a human body, a cell. Each one seemed to be carrying instructions too small for the eye, but powerful enough to shape life. That kind of curiosity can look simple from the outside. A student reads, studies, asks questions, and follows the rules. But inside, something deeper is happening. The mind begins to choose a direction. It begins to feel that reality has hidden doors, and that patience might open a few of them. Katalin's early path did not promise fame. It promised work. She studied biology in a country where resources were limited and scientific ambition required discipline. She learned that serious research is not magic. It is repetition, failure, measurement, correction, and the humility to be wrong many times before a useful answer appears. There is a special kind of strength in learning this early. If you believe science is only a place for brilliant answers, then every mistake feels like a verdict against you. But if you learn that science is a patient conversation with reality, then mistakes become part of the language. Katalin learned to stay in that conversation. She also learned to respect small evidence. A small change in a cell, a small difference in a reaction, a small result that another person might ignore. These details can become the beginning of a life. Her gift was not only intelligence, it was the discipline to keep noticing when the answer did not arrive loudly. That lesson would become the foundation of her life. Long before the world knew her name, she was learning the quiet character of science. Look closely, test carefully, and do not confuse rejection with truth. Chapter 2: The Message Inside the Cell. The idea that captured Katalin was messenger RNA, often called mRNA. In simple terms, mRNA carries instructions. It is like a temporary message that tells cells what kind of protein to make. The message arrives, the cell reads it, and then the message breaks down. It is not meant to stay forever. For many scientists, that temporary nature made mRNA difficult. It was fragile. It could trigger unwanted immune reactions. It was hard to deliver safely and reliably. To some people, it looked like a beautiful idea with too many practical problems. Interesting, maybe. Useful, one day perhaps. But not something that deserved a career. Katalin saw something else. She saw a possible tool. If scientists could learn how to guide mRNA, perhaps the body could be instructed in precise ways. Perhaps medicine could one day use messages instead of only chemicals or surgery. It was not a small thought. It was a doorway into a different kind of treatment. But big ideas do not become real because they sound exciting. They become real only when someone survives the boring, difficult, uncertain middle. Katalin entered that middle and stayed there. She studied RNA when it was not fashionable. She followed the molecule through technical problems that would have pushed many researchers towards safer topics. The pressure was not only scientific, it was practical. Research needs funding, labs need support. Careers depend on publications, grants, and institutional belief. If the people controlling resources do not believe in your direction, your idea can become more than a challenge. It can become a threat to your professional survival. Still, Katalin kept returning to mRNA. Other paths might have been easier, other projects might have made her life more comfortable, but she had seen the possibility, and once she saw it, she could not pretend it was not there. Chapter 3. Leaving home with an unfinished dream. In the 1980s, Katalin and her family made a major decision. They left Hungary and moved to the United States so she could continue scientific work. The move was not glamorous. It was risky, emotional, and full of uncertainty. They were not stepping into a guaranteed future. They were stepping into a chance. Stories about immigration often become simple after success. People say, "She came, she worked hard, and she made it." But inside the real moment, nothing feels that clean. There is language to manage, money to protect, documents to handle, a child to raise, a marriage to sustain, and a career that still has no promise of acceptance. Katalin arrived with ambition, but ambition does not pay rent by itself. She needed positions, mentors, lab space, and the right to keep working. She carried her scientific dream into places where she had to prove herself again. The degrees, the knowledge, the hunger, the sacrifice, all of it had to meet a new system with its own rules. In America, she continued to focus on RNA. She believed that messenger RNA could become a platform for medicine, but belief alone was not enough. The idea needed experiments, and experiments needed support. Support was hard to find. There is a quiet loneliness in being both new to a country and committed to an unpopular idea. You are trying to build a life while also trying to defend a question. You are learning how a system works while asking that same system to take you seriously. Every form, every meeting, every lab conversation can carry more pressure than anyone sees. This is where her story begins to show its unusual shape. Many inspirational biographies rise through a sequence of visible wins. Katalin's path moved through invisible persistence. The most important scenes were not on stages. They happened under fluorescent lab lights, in grant applications, in meetings, and in private moments when she had to decide whether another no would finally be enough. Again and again the answer was no. Not from the institutions. From her. No, I will not stop. No, I will not abandon the idea just because it is difficult. No, I will not let rejection decide what is scientifically possible. Chapter 4. The Years of No. At the University of Pennsylvania, Katalin worked for years on mRNA, but the work did not bring easy approval. Grants were rejected. Promotions did not arrive. Her position became insecure. At one point, she was demoted, a painful signal in an academic world where status often decides who gets heard. Imagine the emotional weight of that. You are not only failing in a private experiment, you are being told, indirectly and directly, that your life's focus may not be worth the investment. You watch other scientists move forward. You see other projects receive money. You keep carrying an idea that seems to make people tired before it makes them curious. For many people, this would be the moment to change direction, not because they lack courage, but because life has limits. A career is not an abstract game. There are bills, health concerns, family needs, and the quiet fear that time is passing. Persistence can be noble, but it can also be expensive. Katalin paid that cost. She did not become bitter in a dramatic public way. She kept working, Her resilience was not loud. It was almost stubbornly practical. If one door closed, she looked for another bench, another collaboration, another way to test the problem. This kind of resilience is easy to admire after the ending is known. It is much harder to live while the ending is still hidden. At the time, there was no guarantee that mRNA would become useful. There was no promise that the rejected grant would later become a famous chapter. There was only the next experiment and the decision to continue. This is one of the most important parts of her story. She did not protect her dream by making it romantic. She protected it by making it daily. She went back to the lab. She read. She prepared. She adjusted. She treated the work as something more important than applause. And inside those years of no, the idea was not dead. It was waiting for the right combination of insight, partnership, and timing. Chapter 5. A Meeting by the Copy Machine. One of the turning points in Katalin's life began in an ordinary place, near a copy machine. She met Drew Weissman, an immunologist who was interested in vaccines and immune responses. The meeting did not look historic, it looked like two scientists talking. But sometimes history enters through a side door. Katalin understood RNA Weissman understood the immune system in ways that could help solve a major problem. Together they began to work on how to make mRNA useful without causing the body to react against it too strongly. The challenge was delicate. The body is built to notice danger. If it sees a message as an intruder, it can respond in ways that block the message or create harmful inflammation. Their collaboration focused on modifying nucleosides, the building blocks inside RNA, so the message could be better tolerated. This was not a flashy breakthrough in the movie sense. There was no single explosion of light. There were experiments, comparisons, controls, failures, and a slow movement toward a result that mattered. In 2005, they published work showing that modified mRNA could reduce unwanted immune activation. It was an important step. Looking back, people can see its significance clearly. At the time, the world did not suddenly stop and celebrate. The paper did not make Katalin instantly famous. The road remained long. That is another hard truth about discovery. Sometimes you find a key, and almost nobody notices the door. The breakthrough exists, but the culture around it is not ready. The funding is not ready. The industry is not ready. The public is not ready. Katalin had to keep believing through a strange form of invisibility. The work was becoming more promising, but recognition still moved slowly. Chapter 6. The Quiet Architecture of a Platform. After the 2005 paper, mRNA still had many problems to solve. A scientific idea becomes a platform only when many pieces begin to work together. Researchers had to think about stability, delivery, dosage, manufacturing, and safety. They had to ask not only, can this work in theory, but also, can it work reliably enough to help real people? Katalin continued inside that long process. Her work helped build confidence in a field that had once seemed too fragile or too risky. The idea was not that mRNA was magic. The idea was that, with careful design, it might become a flexible way to instruct cells for specific medical purposes. This distinction matters. A responsible story about science should not turn discovery into a miracle tale. Katalin's work did not erase uncertainty from medicine. It did not solve every disease. It did not remove the need for testing, review, or caution. What it did was help make a once-dismissed technology more credible and more usable. That is powerful enough. We do not need exaggeration to make her story inspiring. The truth is already remarkable. For years, she kept working on a scientific path that many people considered unrealistic, and that path later became part of a major technological shift. In time, companies and researchers began to see mRNA differently. The field grew, more people joined, investment increased. Ideas that had once sounded distant became active programs. Katalin moved into industry work as well, helping carry the platform closer to real-world application. That movement from lonely research to shared platform is important. No single scientist owns an entire field. Progress happens when an idea becomes strong enough for many hands to test it, improve it, question it, and carry it into new forms. Katalin's role was not to stand alone forever. It was to help keep the possibility alive until the field could grow around it. The dream was changing shape. It was no longer only a lonely belief in a lab. It was becoming an ecosystem, and Katalin had helped hold the door open long enough for others to walk through. Chapter 7. When the World Changed. In 2020, the world changed quickly. A new coronavirus spread across countries, closing schools, separating families, overwhelming hospitals, and filling ordinary life with uncertainty. People everywhere were suddenly watching science in real time. Research that normally moved behind quiet doors became part of daily conversation. For mRNA technology, the moment was extraordinary and intense. Years of prior work allowed researchers and companies to move with unusual speed. Vaccines using mRNA technology were developed, tested, reviewed, and deployed during the pandemic. They became one part of a much larger public health response. For Katalin, the moment carried deep meaning. The molecule she had defended for decades was now central to one of the most watched scientific efforts in modern history. But this was not a simple victory lap. A global crisis is not a stage for personal celebration. It is a moment of responsibility, grief, urgency, and careful communication. The speed of that moment could make the story look sudden, but the speed was built on years that were not sudden at all. It was built on old papers, failed proposals, patient technique, collaboration, manufacturing knowledge, clinical testing, regulatory review, and a scientific community that had been slowly preparing tools before most people were paying attention. The public discussion around vaccines became emotional and sometimes divisive. That makes Katalin's story even more important to tell with care. The heart of her biography is not a political argument. It is the journey of a scientist whose long, patient work helped make a technology ready when the world needed options. Think about the distance between the early rejections in that moment, the grant applications that failed, the promotions that did not come, the years when mRNA sounded too fragile, the days when continuing probably looked unreasonable to many people. Then, suddenly, the old question returned with new force. What if the idea that seemed unrealistic was not unrealistic at all? What if it had only needed time, persistence, and the courage of people who were willing to look foolish before they were proven useful? Chapter 8. Recognition arrives late. After decades of work, recognition finally arrived. Katalin received major awards, public attention, and eventually the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, shared with Drew Weissman, for discoveries that enabled effective mRNA vaccines against COVID-19. The world learned a name that science had nearly overlooked for years. Late recognition has a strange emotional quality. It can feel joyful, but also complicated. Awards do not erase the difficult years. They do not give back the nights of worry, the professional humiliation, or the opportunities lost because others could not yet see the value of the work. But recognition can still matter. It tells younger scientists that the path of discovery is not always smooth or fashionable. It tells institutions that unpopular ideas may deserve more patience. It tells ordinary people that behind every medical technology are human beings who spent years facing uncertainty before a result appeared. Katalin did not become inspiring because she won the Nobel Prize. The Nobel Prize became meaningful because of the life behind it. Without the years of refusal, the award would be only a headline. With those years, it becomes something deeper, a public acknowledgement of private endurance. For students, researchers, builders, artists, and anyone carrying difficult work, that difference matters. A prize can honor the result, but it cannot fully measure the inner life required to reach it. It cannot measure the morning after another rejection, when a person still chooses to show up. It cannot measure the quiet repair of confidence. There is also humility in her story. She often emphasized the work, the science, the collaboration, and the need to continue. That matters because true scientific achievement is rarely a solo performance. It is a chain of people, tools, mentors, critics, technicians, trials, errors, and shared knowledge. Still, one person can become a symbol. Katalin became a symbol of the researcher who keeps going when the room does not applaud, who trusts evidence over popularity, and who lets the work speak even when it takes decades. Chapter 9. The Cost of Being Early. Being early can look like being wrong. That may be the most painful lesson in Katalin Kariko's life. When an idea is ahead of its time, people do not always recognize it as visionary. They may see it as impractical, risky, or simply not worth funding. This creates a deep test of identity. If everyone important says no, how do you know whether you are persistent or mistaken? How do you protect your confidence without becoming arrogant? How do you keep listening to evidence while refusing to surrender to fashion? Katalin's answer was not blind stubbornness. She did not keep the same belief untouched by reality. She kept testing. She kept adapting. She kept searching for ways to solve the problems that critics could fairly identify. That is different from ignoring criticism. It is using criticism as a map while refusing to let it become a prison. The cost of being early is that you may spend years without proof that others can understand. You may have only partial results, small signs, and a conviction that still needs time. The world likes finished stories, but science is built from unfinished ones. There is danger here too. Not every rejected idea is secretly brilliant. Some ideas fail because the evidence is weak. Katalin's strength was that she did not ask the world to believe her simply because she cared. She kept working to make the evidence stronger. She kept moving the idea from hope toward demonstration. Her life reminds us that progress often depends on people who can live in that unfinished space. They do not need constant applause. They do not need every meeting to end with approval. They need enough support to continue, enough discipline to improve, and enough inner steadiness to survive delay. That is not only a scientific lesson, it is a human one. Many meaningful paths begin before the world knows how to value them. If you are too dependent on immediate approval, you may abandon the work right before it begins to matter. Chapter 10. The Message She Leaves Behind. Katalin Kariko's story lands with a quiet force because it does not pretend that perseverance is easy, it shows the real texture of it. Perseverance can feel lonely. It can look unimpressive. It can involve demotion, rejection, small offices, uncertain contracts, and years of explaining the same idea to people who do not yet believe. But it also shows what perseverance can protect. It can protect a question until the world is ready for the answer. It can protect a fragile possibility through the years when it has no audience. It can protect the kind of work that later seems obvious only because someone refused to let it disappear. Katalin did not control the timing of history. She did not know in the early years exactly how mRNA technology would later be used. She could not see every future application. What she could control was her relationship to the work in front of her. She could choose to return. She could choose to learn. She could choose to keep the door open. That choice is the emotional center of her biography. Not fame, not a perfect career, not a straight climb. The center is a woman carrying a message through decades of doubt until the message finally reached the world. And the message is not only about mRNA. It is about the invisible years inside any meaningful achievement. The years when nobody writes articles about you. The years when your work is not yet beautiful to others. The years when the only evidence of your future is the fact that you return again. And maybe that is why her life speaks beyond science. Everyone has some version of a message, a project, a talent, a promise, a responsibility, a hope that others may not understand yet. The question is not whether the world will recognize it immediately. The question is whether you can keep becoming the kind of person who is worthy of the work. So if Katalin Kariko's story stays with you, let it stay in its honest form. Not as a fantasy that every rejection will become a Nobel Prize, but as a reminder that rejection is not always the final verdict. Sometimes it is only the sound a closed door makes before history finds another entrance. Keep listening, keep building your English, and keep returning to the work that still matters when nobody is clapping yet.